Hey everyone, as always I am here with Corey. Say hi, Corey.
Hey, how's it going?
And we are two professional pixel artists, and my current freelance client, the nice people at Pixel Sprout making their game Sunhaven. For my birthday, they were nice enough to send me this awesome book. Spoiler alert. But point is, the quality of this book was so high, I mentioned to Corey, hey, we should maybe do a kind of first impressions review video to show everyone. At some point when I was talking to those nice folks at Pixel Sprout, I must have mentioned to them that I was one of those rare American kids that actually had a Sega Master System. For the first year or so of my life in 8-bit gaming, we had a Sega Master System in our house before we got the 8-bit Nintendo as well. But yeah, they must have remembered that kind of offhand comment I made about it and were thoughtful enough to send me this awesome book. And without further ado, let's get into what comes with the book. Just to start off with, there's this really nice little card, and I liked the attitude of it. I like the fact that it says, we hope you enjoy the book. It says you can get a 5% off your next purchase if you review the book, but the great thing is it doesn't say it has to be a positive review. So that really shows confidence in the quality of the book. But spoiler alert, again, the book is very good. So I definitely am interested in looking at some of the other systems and things like that they cover. So you could see that everything is very sturdy. I was really shocked. I'll put some measurements on screen when I edit this video. Everything's really thick, solid cardboard, really nice thick paper. I've got really poor lighting and camera setup, so my apologies for that. But the level of sheen is really nice. It's quite matte, and even though my lighting can make it look quite glossy at times, there's no glare issues when you're actually looking with the human eye. There's a nice slip cover that further protects the book, which has, the same exact cover on it. And as Corey noticed earlier, the actual case for the book is actually the kind of holographic thing where it has two different frames.
Yeah. I wonder if they do that with all of them, or if it was like they started doing it after a while. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
There was one. This is not a defect, obviously. This is damage that happened, and I figured I'd not repair it yet until we do the video. It was packaged quite well, but my particular package got lost in shipping limbo for like a month. When it finally got to me, I think it had been kicked around a little too much. But the point is, I don't let that reflect poorly on the actual publishers. That's something that happened along the way, and in this case, it's easy to fix, so I'm not that worried about it. So let's get into the actual book. Oh yeah, another thing you'll notice is how thick. Look at the girth on this thing.
Right.
It's actually like 427 pages or something like that. I looked earlier.
Yeah. I didn't realize these books were so in depth.
Substantial.
There was so much in them.
Just really beautiful printing quality, color fidelity, the print quality, the resolution is all fantastic. And it just really surprised me how in-depth they've got so many interviews, so much kind of inside detail on the development of specific games. And I'm kind of going backwards here, but let's start at the beginning. So you'll see they talk about that kind of the birth of the company, the birth of the system, the nice pixel art throughout. And then the evolution of the system, if it had different kind of iterations, really nice schematics. And for those that don't know, especially a lot of Americans that aren't really familiar with the system, Corey and I also previously did one of our forensic pixology videos talking about a lot of the graphics of specific Sega Master System games and the graphic capabilities of the Sega Master System in general. So you might want to check that video out. But another interesting thing that they did is they had these cards, I forget what they were called, but basically the games were available in cartridge form, which could store more memory, and therefore typically cartridge games were the more AAA games and more expensive because memory back then was very expensive. So, and the other cool thing is this very card slot here was used by the really cool 3D goggles that the Master System supported. It wasn't just like what Nintendo did with the anaglyph red and blue glasses that some very few games supported. They actually had one of those liquid crystal display shutter style 3D goggles. It has to be one of the first ever in the industry, where it actually used synchronizing electrical pulses in the goggles to make one lens opaque and then the other one let you see through, alternating at like 50 or 60 frames per second. And the interface that would plug into this slot here would basically make sure that the goggle synchronizes with whether or not the whole screen is displaying the left eye image or the right eye image. Marketing wise, and because of a lack of stellar third party support, the Master System was always the underdog in America, and I think even in Japan, but they did really well in places like Europe and South America. The hardware, especially graphically, was actually quite superior to the 8-bit Nintendo, but as we well know, marketing and even more importantly back then, the quality and quantity of great games is really what mattered. And that's where Nintendo's amazing first-party and third-party support came in.
Yeah, because the NES hardware, it is what it is. You can take not-so-great hardware, but if you got great developers and games, that makes the big difference. But it's interesting to see this because we all know what NES games were capable of, but the Master System it's interesting the different levels that developers got with developing graphics for it. Like, you see, like, some games where they took it to another level, and then some games where they dialed it back. Yeah. So this book looks very interesting for that reason. You could see it in all its glory.
Yeah,
so to speak, so.
Absolutely. And it's a shame. You had all the AAA studios with immense talent, and they had bigger budgets because you knew, even though the 8-bit Nintendo's hardware was inferior, the marketplace, the potential people who would buy your game was so much higher that you could invest more. You could hire more talent and give them more time and even more money on memory for your cartridge to make the best game possible. So even though the Master System was drastically superior graphically, you'd almost never know it by looking at the average Master System game. The people making games for the Master System were almost never allowed to really flex the muscles of the system or even themselves as developers, and that really shows. Like, you see most games like this and you've seen stuff much nicer than that on the 8-bit Nintendo, but then when you see some of the other games, you could see really what it was capable of. This was a real fun game. It's one of the ones I actually had. It was called Action Fighter, and just really nice vertical driving, racing, but also shmup style game. And it was really cool because some levels you're on a motorcycle and then a car, and then the car transforms and gets wings, and then like it's a flying shmup. Really fast action, really fun. My two favorite games from the Master System, there was this game and a game I'll mention again soon, Black Belt. High action, very fast, non-stop action, and almost a kind of built-in rhythm action kind of thing going on. And it's something that you don't see a lot of, so you could see they just have really in-depth interviews, especially whenever it's appropriate. Oh yeah, check this out. One of the more famous games, this game was huge in Brazil and parts of Europe, Alex Kidd, because it was also a pack-in for the Master System for a while. But look at this, they even do multi-page spreads of levels both ways, so really amazing quality. And you could see, here we go back to Black Belt. This was the splash screen. I mentioned Corey and I were both professional pixel artists, but we're also, we call ourselves Bitbeam Canon. We're indie developers, and we're working on two kind of 16-bit retro action games. One of them was heavily influenced, the game called Damon Claw we're working on. The initial inspiration for the general gameplay was actually based on Black Belt mixed with some of the cooler concepts of the game Altered Beast.
We also played through Black Belt on the channel in one of our Let's Plays.
Yeah, we'll have to link to that video as well. But this was one of the visually more impressive games, even though it didn't require a ton of memory because of the nature of the game. You don't have large animated humanoid characters that require tons of frames. It's just like, little airplanes and helicopters, but really impressive parallaxing and use of color, and the difficulty is quite high, like many 8-bit games back then. Here's another really famous game, Fantasy Zone. So many different versions made for so many systems, but this is starting to be, you're definitely starting to see the 8-bit Nintendo just could not put this kind of colors. Like, one of the basic differences every last sprite on the Sega Master System could use the full 16-color sprite palette, whereas any one sprite on the 8-bit Nintendo could only be 3-color, but it goes far beyond that. This is another fantastic game. I forgot about this one. It's simply called the Ninja. Much like the Master System had really embarrassing box art for most of its life. It was just like really bad clip art on a graph paper grid, white and black. But much like the art on the boxes was kind of generic, so too was the name of many of the games like Black Belt and The Ninja. But actually this game was really good. Most of the levels were kind of vertical overhead, like I Carry Warriors type stuff. But some were more side-scrolling. There was a lot of variety. If I recall, the music was quite nice as well. Which I have to say, that's definitely somewhere. I keep saying that the Master System was graphically more powerful, but there were so many brilliant musicians that made music for the 8-bit Nintendo that I've got to say that, you know, that's one place especially where not only just the number of high-quality AAA games that are just really fun and look great, there's more of them on the 8-bit Nintendo. Same thing with the music. I mean, very few games. Yeah,
the music was a big part of the experience there. I haven't played a lot of Master System games, but that is one of the things I've noticed watching a lot of long plays and stuff is like, the music, it's not quite there. You know, it's a little...
Way more bleeps and blunks. You know what I mean? It's you know, obviously the audio fidelity of the 8-bit Nintendo wasn't great either, but I think it had some kind of technical edge, but also definitely you just had so many amazing, like, Konami, Capcom, and Nintendo hired musicians that just did amazing music within those technical constraints. They spend more pages for the more popular games, which makes a lot of sense, so Space Harrier was a pretty big one. And then they even cover a lot of the peripherals that were available. I don't even know this. I don't recognize this game. I never had it, but it looks pretty funny. Oh, yep, there's another one I had. A great 2-player action game, also very similar to I Carry Warriors. And you had like your Rambo character, and then kind of the second player was like an Action Jackson, if you remember him from
that was like its own genre back then, and they did the top-down war game or whatever. There was a lot of those.
Snail Maze. I love how they gave this a two-page spread. The original Master System, they actually bothered to kind of hide a tiny little game, kind of like their Pac-Man. And it was just, I forgot what you did. Like, you held down one of the buttons on your controller while you powered up the system, I think. And instead of booting into the cartridge, or maybe it was you don't turn it on with the cartridge out, I don't remember. But anyway, we just go into this Snail Maze game, and you're literally just controlling a snail and navigating a maze. But there, we get a Duck Hunt clone. What is this? Safari Hunt. So, staying within the safe legal...
Right.
But anyway, so I don't want to take forever. We'll just touch on the more popular games. But I did want to mention, we're going to get to it. Yeah, this is definitely getting into the situation where some games they didn't even bother trying to port to the 8-bit Nintendo. This may have been one of them. I think the first R-Type was another. That game really shows off the difference where you can actually have 16-color sprites where every last sprite on the 8-bit Nintendo would have to be 3-color. Especially its what's called blitting power of the Master System was incredible. But I'll try not to get into too much detail on that. Check out our Forensic Pixology video. There's a famous one, Phantasy Star.
That's what's amazing about this era of games is it is the earliest pixel art stuff, like right at the beginning. So there was a lot of experimentation. People, they weren't completely sure what they were doing sometimes. They were very experimental and trying different things. And that's both good and bad for the era. It's good in the ways that you see a lot of things that surprise you that you wouldn't expect. And then bad sometimes because you'll see when a developer couldn't quite cut it or utilize the hardware,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the art form of pixel art was evolving as fast as the hardware was.
Right,
for sure.
Yes.
And it is shocking the difference of if you had like a really experienced or just really talented pixel artist on your game, especially back then with the hardware constraints, boy, could it make a difference in the visual appeal and overall quality of the game. So here we go back to the 3D thing. And what's really cool is every time, check this out, they even bothered to make the screenshots for the games that supported the 3D goggles, Like, obviously, these are printed pages, so they can't use the liquid crystal display, shutter system. But they actually included with the book a very nice branded anaglyph 3D glasses. And
Nice.
they printed the screenshots in anaglyph 3D of the 3D game. So that's really cool. And there's many game screenshots.
Well,
in there.
you gotta do it for the.
Yeah, I forgot my face was on camera. Good thing I wasn't picking my nose at any point, or at least I hope not. We'll see. I'll edit that out if that was the case. But anyway, 3D glasses over glasses. We all know the discomfort of that.
I mean, does it work well with the print?
Yeah,
Or
some more than others, but that was actually true with the game. This is definitely the best because the perspective is so extreme. That really helps. Some of them, you'll say, this one also wasn't bad, but some of them where it's just kind of an overhead game. Take these off while I'm on pages that are not anaglyph 3D because
it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Oh, this was another great game, Rocky. Look how giant the characters are.
That game was surprisingly high quality.
Yeah.
There were a lot of bad movie games back then, but this one, it's like the developers really cared about the quality of it. Yeah.
But here's another 3D one. So in the cases like this, the field of depth is not very high to begin with, and there's nothing really showing extreme perspective like a cityscape from overhead or something. So here's a Space Harrier 3D. Yeah, it was just really nice. They went through a lot of extra work and expense to make this happen, to more accurately represent the 3D experience from the Master System into a book. So I really appreciate the fact that they put in the extra work. That was the thing. Sega back then with their hardware, you could tell they really cared more about the power that the hardware could deliver. Unfortunately, like I said, that's not enough. If you don't gain enough of a market that companies, especially third-party companies, can take that risk of spending more money and more time to make a game, you've got all this power in your hardware, but no one can afford to use it or take that risk to really put it to full use. So it's a shame. But yeah, this one has pretty extreme perspective, so it's a pretty good effect. But anyway, here we go. Another very popular game, Zillion. So they did another like 4-page, what do they call that? Like fan fold.
Right, yeah.
Back to the really famous game, Alex Kidd. There were a lot of Alex Kidd games, like in Miracle World and Shinobi World. I actually never played any of those, even though it was one of the most famous. Like, they wanted Alex Kidd to kind of be the mascot of the system.
Right.
And I think it really caught on in some places like Brazil, but us few Americans that had it, by the time Alex Kidd came out, I think we were all already had an 8-bit Nintendo as well by then and had just moved on to Mario.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, some really nice large characters, and this definitely would be them using the really nice blitting tile abilities of the Master System to be able to get giant characters on top of backgrounds. This kind of shows off the enhanced color fidelity. It wasn't massive, but I think overall there are maybe like about 10 more colors total that the Master System could pick from. The Sega Master System palette was more scientifically arranged in gradients, and there were more of them that you could pick from. Poseidon, that's a cool one. It looks very inspired by, what was that one? Ninja Spirit, there we go. Visually, it looks extremely inspired by Ninja Spirit. I'll put video footage of both games on there so you could see how they compare. Yeah, and Alien Syndrome was another pretty famous arcade port. Which, Zillion 2 I had and beat this game. I just, especially back in the day, man, did I love Transformers and anything that transformed. And Zillion 2 was a really nice, I think, manga series inspired game. Very similar, if you remember, like the second series of Robotech, they introduced motorcycles that would literally transform and become like a robot exosuit around the driver. That basically.
Oh, yep. So they just called it Zillion 2. They should have called the sequel Buzzillion.
Pretty impressive for the day, but the system can definitely do quite a bit better. And so here's a section on arcade conversions, and we mentioned this game specifically, Golden Axe and Altered Beast, in our Forensic Pixology, but they were able to get, especially on screen shots and this 8-bit system, remarkably close to the arcade, and that was because instead of using sprites, they used, again, that blitting tile trick to have all the characters on screen, and very impressive. At the cost of kind of frame rate, the movement was very choppy, because then the characters, if you're going to make the characters out of tiles, then for them to move, it has to be in 8 pixel increments instead of smoothly 1 pixel at a time. Golvelius, this one I think was actually quite popular, but I never played it, and you could say it must have been because they dedicated several pages to it.
I remember looking into that game. It looked almost kind of like the game Crystallis on NES.
And the classic Rampage. This is another good one. I'm almost certain there was a port made for the 8-bit Nintendo as well. And this is another game where you could really see the graphical prowess of the Master System, where you could see the amount of colors in these monsters is much more 16-bit looking. Every last guy can use any of the colors it wants from a 16-color sprite palette, instead of having to pick between 4 different 3-color palettes.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh wow, there's a classic, Shinobi. Everyone knows, I think, about this game. Again, you could see the amount of colors. Those look like extremely 16-bit sprites there. Just keep going. There's another. This one's light and has a pretty extreme perspective, so it should do pretty well with the 3D effect. Yeah, that's pretty decent. This is definitely a contender or tie with that other one with the overhead cityscape. So, and a more famous game, I would say.
If you construct the right palette with the Master System, you can get very close to 16-bit quality. Exactly. It's tough though, because it's limited color, but
it really can be impressive. And yeah, they're R-type. If it weren't for the sprite flicker and the lack of parallax in most levels, you'd really be hard-pressed to tell that it's not a 16-bit version of the game. Again, Altered Beast, it played very choppily, but I would sure as hell much rather play the choppy 8-bit Master System version of the game over the Nintendo version.
The Nintendo version, you might as well have just given that one a different title and not called it the same game. It looks nothing like it, and it doesn't feel like it at all. Yeah.
But, all right, let's keep going. Oh, there's another super famous one, Bubble Bobble. I never got into playing it much, but I really appreciate its cuteness, and it must have been a lot of fun.
I had the NES one. It was a great 2-player game.
Sweet.
Had a lot of levels. Yeah. So.
Nice. So there's a lot. I've not read the book yet, so I look forward to learning more about some of these games I've never even heard of. Again, this has to be using the animated tiles trick. And imagine trying to get like a giant animated wave in high color with some of the tiles under and some over the actual character sprite, who again can be 16 colors. And that's the other amazing thing on the Master System. There's a whole separate 16 colors palette for the sprites and for the tiles. And then I think it's the tiles, right, that can pick if it's going to use the 16-color tile palette or the sprite palette.
So you actually could use all 32 colors
in the background
on the tiles, in the background tiles.
I'll see if I can find footage of that. But I do remember some games really put good use to that effect. Even if they couldn't get a full-on parallax, which the Master System was capable, just like the 8-bit Nintendo with screen slicing, and the Master System did not need that kind of helper chip so that they could have more parallax in animated tiles. But the Master System, out of the box, had more drawing power for the tiles so that it could animate tiles on the fly without the need for the helper chip. It did also have a great light gun as well. Not a ton of games that supported it, but definitely some decent ones. There's Alex Kidd and Shinobi. From what I've heard, this is the best playing of the Alex Kidd games, at least from some of the reviewers that I watch.
They made a lot of those,
yeah.
They?
Like I said,
kept making them, like even into modern times, there's a huge fan base for it, I guess.
Yeah, there really is. Anyway, but
and all those Disney Mickey games or whatever were really quality back then. Like all those platformers.
Yeah.
I'm blown away by the amount of ports they still did for the Master System, even after the Mega Drive was out. Like, they kept doing it. I guess, there was money in certain areas, certain parts of the world and stuff for that. So
I think, were there some Donald Duck games on the Master System? Or because I wasn't sure if I was just mixing it with the Game Gear, which had also some really beautiful Donald Duck-based platformer games. But I think it was the same game, just they may have put use to some of the Game Gear's higher color fidelity on that version. There's the Master System Sonic version. I've heard that it plays fairly well, but you're taking a concept.
Yeah, it looks like a good enough port.
Yeah. But you're taking a concept that relied on speed and the gimmick of the loop-de-loops, and now, like, this version for memory constraints couldn't do the loop-de-loops.
I had a Game Gear for so many years, and I had a Sonic game for it. I think it was like the second one. It was like Sonic 2 for Game Gear or something.
Yeah.
I believe that there is overlap between those versions and the Master System versions. They Same games ported.
Yeah.
And from what I remember, it was fun. It was pretty fun, and it looked very much like this. But I know what you mean. This entire franchise was built to show off that 16-bit system. Like, it was almost a tech demo in a way. With those trees, I remember they made use of that tile trick I was talking about, where they were in front of the character. He runs behind them, but see how he would still be on top of that water in the background? That wouldn't be possible in the NES.
Exactly.
In the NES, he would go behind all of those pixels and only be on top of the background color.
Exactly.
Or behind, rather.
I've never tried the 8-bit version of Strider. I have no idea how good it is, but another famous game.
The quality of these books is... really, really awesome. They make other ones too, don't they? Like all kinds of various versions. I gotta look into these more. Might have to get some of these.
I'm so impressed with the quality. I did never mention, but it's even got the ribbon bookmarks, and there's 2 of them, so you could even bookmark 2 different pages at once. But just the quality is so nice. And this is another great example of just the graphical prowess of the Master System. You can just have so many more colors overlapping in an area. Every tile... I kept mentioning that color limitation of only 3 in the sprites, but it's the same with the tiles. Every tile on the Master System that makes the graphics, every 8x8 tile can use the full 16 color, and can even choose to use the 16 colors of the tile palette or the different 16 colors of the sprite palette. So that's amazing graphical power. The 8-bit Nintendo, even the tiles had an even worse limitation than that, because even though technically the tiles were 8x8, every 16 by 16 pixel grid on the screen had to use only one 4-color tile, and one of those 4 colors had to be the same background color on every palette set. So again, you had 12 colors to use total for your background, and every 16 by 16 could only use one of those 4 3-color palettes. So it's amazing the quality of some of the 8-bit Nintendo games, especially by companies like Capcom. How beautiful they were able to make some environments and stuff like that, given those limitations.
It's why you don't see too much diagonal type stuff on the NES. It gets very blocky with the way people had to design things. And don't get me wrong, people ended up taking it to a zone, like people at Capcom and stuff, where it looked pretty good for the Nintendo. But at the end of the day, it's like you're always going to get those straight lines. You're never going to get a curve or a diagonal done very well with those palette limitations. But on the Master System, you had all the background colors available for all the tiles.
Anyway, so... some really nice... There's a lot of really nice graphics of games I've not even seen before. Again, a popular game getting the full treatment, so to speak. But just amazing print quality. Here's their knockoff attempt of Castlevania. Decent job. They come close to approaching 16-bit quality in some places, but boy, this goes to show you that whole quality of game versus quality of hardware that it's running on.
Right.
I'd much rather play any Castlevania game over this, but a decent attempt, but definitely not a AAA caliber of gameplay design.
Right.
Again, this is beautiful. The nuance of color, the use of fairly monochromatic background. I don't think they did, but man, if they had spent the extra memory to make this parallax. There's an 8-bit Nintendo game that did an amazing job at that. I can't remember if it's called something like Faxanadu. It's like a side-scrolling knight or warrior platformer. Yeah, I should stop soon flipping through the pages. We've shown like 80% of the pages. But yeah, it's a really beautiful book, and it was a huge amount of fun kind of strolling through memory lane and talking nerdy graphic stuff with Corey. And... I guess we'll end the video there, but I'm almost certain that these guys have an arcade, or I should say Neo Geo, and maybe also Capcom arcade book. But I'll have to look into it. I think this is their SNK one. This is right up our alley.
I don't want to get you started on SNK, because then you're gonna talk for 2 more hours.
That's for sure. But actually, that reminds me, we've not done forensic pixology on the Neo Geo system in general.
Yeah, we've thrown around the idea, but we'll have to get to that, because that's going to be a fun one. Yeah, for sure.
All right, awesome. But yeah, we'll end this video here.
Yeah.
That's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back again soon.
If you enjoy our content and want to keep up to date on our games, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, if you want to support our projects, consider becoming a patron. The link's in the description, and we'll see you soon.